I am trying a new hair oil, and I cannot tell if it's actually doing its job or if it's just making me look greasy. That is the eternal struggle of having naturally thin hair. Also the eternal struggle of having a cheap Amazon pop screen. Hello friends, it's the Stitches. Pop screen, I swear to God, if you move one more time, I'm just watching it slide off of my microphone. My guy. Friends, I have a bit of a confession to make. In my possession on the other side of this room, I have entirely too much fabric. Almost all of it is either secondhand or gifted. I can literally count all of the fabrics that I purchased new on my fingers. Please stay. I try my best to only buy what I need for specific projects. I don't always stick to that, but I try. And yet, somehow I have acquired so much fabric that my current methods for storing it all are no longer adequate. To be fair, I did recently acquire a very large quantity of fabric that I absolutely was not planning on. And that was the catalyst for everything you're about to see today. My in-laws have a neighbor that used to sew quite a bit, and they recently made the decision that they no longer enjoy sewing. It's also just much cheaper to purchase the things that they used to make for themselves, so they've been trying to find other people who sew that they can unload their fabric stash onto. So my in-laws asked me if I was interested in looking at what they had, and I'm simply not going to turn down free sewing supplies. I don't know what I was expecting, but when I walked into this person's living room, there were at least a dozen, maybe even like 15 of those extra large storage bins that people put like holiday decorations in, full of various different kinds of fabric. I ended up walking away with several $100s worth of free fabric. Just so much more fabric than I was expecting to receive. And like, thank you so much. But also, I need to rearrange my storage situation now. First, I had to wash all of the fabric that I got. I didn't ask them if they pre-washed their fabrics before storing them, but I personally pre-wash everything as soon as I get it. New fabric always shrinks a little bit the first time you wash it, and I don't like to have to think about that when I'm ready to sew something. I just want to be able to pull the fabric off the shelf and start cutting it, so I always wash everything as soon as it enters my house. I also didn't know how long it had been stored for, so I just wanted to give the fabric a nice refresh. However, that does mean that I wound up with a massive pile of fabrics that I needed to fold and roll and prepare for storage once again. I do prefer to roll my fabric up like this instead of folding it. When I was in college for costume design, I had to work a certain number of hours in a costume shop pretty much every quarter, and this is how we stored fabric in the costume shop. We just had a big wall of cubbies, and fabric was rolled like this and secured with safety pins. That way, not only could we visibly see everything we had, but we could also dig through it and move stuff around and not have to worry about everything unfolding and turning into a giant mess. Ever since then, I've just kind of kept the habit, and I do think that my fabric storage stays neater this way. Once I tamed all my new fabrics, I did have a few pieces that I left folded because I just had so much of them that I wanted to put them on bolts, but we'll get to that in a bit. In addition to all these fun fabrics, I also grabbed this massive length of gray denim. There's so much of this, and it's such a nice weight that I just couldn't leave it behind. Thick denim like this is so expensive, and it can always be bleached and dyed any color that I want. This by itself was probably worth at least $200. After I dealt with my incoming fabrics, it was time to have a good look at my storage closet. I don't know why there aren't any doors on this closet. It was clearly intended for clothing storage, and this room was clearly intended to be a bedroom, but there are several things my landlord has done to this property that defy all logic. The first thing I did was remove all the plastic tubs that I had been storing here for some reason that I no longer remember. There are some sentimental items that I have in the tubs, but they don't really need to be here. That already frees up a lot of room. I pulled out all of my fabrics and all of my other supplies that I keep in and on this cubby set. And then I set the cubbies aside since this was the perfect time to sweep out the closet. Then I put the cubbies back and I set it down on the longer side. I was getting a little annoyed by how crowded the closet looked when I hung up my in-progress projects, so this will give those garments more space to hang. The shelf above this space holds patterns, swatch books, zine flats, business tax related stuff, filled sketchbooks, miscellaneous supplies, and also even more fabric. This is mostly stuff I've gotten from thrift stores, like curtains and bed sheets and tablecloths, things like that. Now that my storage has been emptied out, I put all of my fabrics together on my cutting table. And oh my god, I did not realize how much I actually had. I was sticking to only using fabric I already had for my last several projects, mostly for cost-saving reasons, but now it will be for space-saving reasons. I went to my local fabric store to pick up some of those bits of cardboard that are left over when a bolt of fabric is completely finished with, like all the fabric has been purchased and all that's left is the bolt that it was left on. Fabric stores just give these away for free, that way they don't have to throw them away. My local fabric store just puts them in a bin to the side, that way people can come and grab them without even needing to ask. I always feel awkward just taking them without saying anything, so I'm always like, yeah, I'm taking these, and they're like, yeah, we don't care. But unfortunately, this time around, when I went to grab some, they only had one, and almost all of the others that I already had fabric on them, so I did not wind up having enough. I also ran out of safety pins, so at the end of this whole process, there will still be at least some fabric that has to be folded and stacked. As much as I would have loved to have had it all rolled and put on bolts. I'll simply have to get to work and use up as much fabric as quickly as possible so that I can achieve that goal.
And now it's time for a quick commercial break.
I stacked my boxes of supplies, which for the record is also mostly fabric, just smaller scrap pieces, on top of the cubbies. I used to keep these in the cubbies, but I wanted to reserve as much space for my rolled fabric as possible. I put my little cube drawers along the bottom of the cubby shelf thing, and then I started to fill the top cubbies with my rolled fabrics. I wound up having so much of the rolled fabrics that I decided to sacrifice one of my drawers. I don't really keep much in these little cube storage drawers anyway, so it was perfectly fine. The depth of this closet perfectly fit this old cardboard box, so I used it to store my bolts of fabric upright. And that is everything successfully rearranged. I'll give you the briefest of tours. I had enough space on the top shelf area for all of my binders and sketchbooks, as well as this box that contains secrets. It's just an old plush that I made many years ago that mildly freaks out my husband. Shout out to the small portion of my audience who have been around long enough to remember where I got this box from. I also have my patterns up here still, and the fabric in the corner is for a special secret project that wound up on the back burner, but I'm still reserving it for its original intended purpose, so it'll just stay here separated from the rest of my fabrics for now. Hanging on the closet bar are all of my in-progress projects that are in various stages of completion. Most of these are also reserved for secret projects that have been backburnered, so I won't say much about them. Starting on the left-hand side of the bottom of the closet, I have my longer lengths of fabric on bolts. I also keep my interfacings and muslin on bolts so that they're easy to find. On top of the cubby set, I have my most frequently used supplies. This tin holds my embroidery flosses, then my button box, which is broken because the box itself is older than I am, as are many of the buttons inside of it, and then my hardware and jewelry making bits. I have a separate storage box under my cutting table for the rest of my tools, but my pliers live here. In the actual boxes, I have my embellishments, so all of my ribbons and lace and unused patches and anything I might use to trim or decorate a garment. Under that is my box of tiny fabric scraps. These are fabrics that I like too much to cut up for stuffing, but are too small to have any real purpose. If I ever want to paint or embroider a tiny patch for a jacket or something, then these are the fabrics I'll reach for. Next, I have my actual fabric scraps. I try to use these up as regularly as possible. Under that is my box of muslin scraps. When I'm done with a mock-up that I don't need anymore, I'll pick it apart and reuse the muslin. I use these pieces before I cut any new muslin. Whenever I have a t-shirt that's falling apart, I turn it into t-shirt yarn. I do have a project that I want to make with this eventually, but I don't have quite enough yarn yet. Then finally I have my knit fabric scraps, which I keep separate from everything else because knit fabrics and woven fabrics have entirely different purposes. The drawers at the bottom of my cubby hold lesser used but still very important supplies. The first one is where I keep my zippers and elastics, boning, stuff like that. I also keep my photography props, like the letters I've used in my various intro sequences, in here as well. And in the other drawer, I have the little bits of scrap fabric that I cut up to make stuffing. I also have a couple little bags of actual polyfill at the moment, which is rather unusual for me. I've also saved the shoulder pads that I took out of my vintage Dior blazer that I thrifted, if you remember that video. If I ever decide to put the shoulder pads back in, or if I sell the blazer at some point in the future, I won't have to dig for them because they're right here. Then in the right-hand corner, I have my roll of craft paper that I use to make patterns, as well as my wrapping paper that I use at Christmas to wrap presents because I just don't have anywhere else to store it. I also have these giant envelopes that I got from Eco Enclose that I was originally going to use for shipping, but they weren't quite what I was expecting, so now I use them to house patterns that I'm still in the process of drafting. Also in this corner, I have the pads for my dress form. So those are all the garment making supplies that I keep here. That's all for today. I'm not sure how exciting this video will be, but I'm personally always curious to see how people store their sewing supplies. So maybe this was interesting for other people who are just as nosy as I am. I also just kind of feel like if I expose myself for being the fabric hoarder that I am, it will push me to use up the fabric faster. Hopefully this will encourage me to actually use what I have and not buy anything new, which hasn't been that much of a problem. I haven't bought actual fabric since I got the satin lining for my vest that I made like 7 months ago now. So I'm doing good, but I want to make some bigger, more ambitious sewing projects that will use up even more fabric. At the moment, I'm working on a project using a vintage pattern, and a video for that will be out sometime this month, probably the week after this one. But I also just really want to make some projects that are bigger, flashier, more exciting. However, for the time being, I hope everyone has a good day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!